The story begins with a girl who always dreamed of being a villain, rather than the protagonist of a novel. And even if someone doesn't like it, she's still a villain born into a wealthy family. Most of all, she would not want a life where she would tolerate unpleasant and toxic people, who will tell her the right way to do something or point out any mistakes, and in which she would have died because of an accident caused by another human being. And unsurprisingly, most likely no one even missed her after that, or even noticed she was gone. When she woke up in a new body, in a new room, and surrounded by other people, from that moment on, she had a new life. Girl even had her own assistant, who, as soon as she saw her mistress awake, offered breakfast to the evening. All the food was insanely appetizing, like being in a real princess palace. Thus she began to live the life she dreamed of. All happened from the moment she was reincarnated in the body of the rich villain of the novel. That day she couldn't believe she was the girl she dreamed of becoming all her life. But it hadn't turned out quite the way she'd imagined. Fantasy novel Cordelia's Light, Lady Yvonne, a cruel and immoral villainess. Upon learning of the engagement of her beloved Adrian with the novel's protagonist, Cordelia, she made a contract with the devil and gained the power of darkness. Magician Yvonne became even stronger through demonic power. She turned into a great dark mage and tormented the main characters, eventually met her end, and died tragically. Yvonne decided that she wasn't going to let that ending happen. It was going to be the way she wanted it to be. Girl who had read the novel, of all the villains, she was most jealous of Yvonne, whom she had turned into her family owned an orichalcum mine and several gemstone mines. They had their own trading company, selling the best magic items in the empire, and her father was the owner of a magic tower, because in the long history of the family, there were many magicians in the lineage. Yvonne had such a lovely figure that her assistant always admired her abs and perfect body, even though the girl didn't do much exercise. In addition to her unique beauty, she was also quite good at magic. Sometimes it happened that a girl would admire herself and repeat to herself that she was perfection itself. In her previous life, she was an orphan, lived in a slum, and worked hard at night without end. Compared to her old life, her new life seems like a fairy tale. From here on out, her job is to be happy for the two main characters and their happy ending. She thought about the fact that it was only worth bypassing this problem in the form of the main characters, and there was no way Yvonne was going to become a dark mage. When suddenly her assistant comes in and tells her that Yvonne has a duke to see her, which she didn't expect. The girl got up abruptly from the bed and saw that he had already come, and after that he immediately said that he had given her a probationary period, and asked if she had not repented in the slightest, and that she was up to something again. It was Kaiser Argentros, head of the family and master of the magic tower. Before she got into Yvonne's body, she did something terrible. She planted one thing in the place where the main characters had their date, but luckily there were no fatalities after that. And now the girl will have to take responsibility for what she didn't do, because she reincarnated into this body after the incident. Unfortunately, once she was here, she received a punishment for it, which was that she must sit in her room and not come out of it. She could eat whatever she wanted and lie on her bed whenever she wanted to. This kind of punishment she really liked, except she wondered what Kaiser didn't like. Maybe she ate too much or rested, haha. But still, so as not to seem insolent, the girl apologized and said she would think about her action and behavior, so that it would not be like her at all. When suddenly the man called his assistant, and the girl was very frightened, for she thought she might be thrown out for misbehavior. But it turns out he just asked her for an assignment with some paperwork, to which the assistant suggested that it might be too difficult for Yvonne, because there were too many documents for a first assignment. At that moment, she wondered if she'd have to work all day here too. And then, as if the man had read her mind, and said that from today, she would work 6 hours every day. But after her past 6 hours, it was too easy for her. After all, she used to have to work 30 hours and the work was much harder. So she took the punishment as an easy job. But this time, the man's words were more convincing. He said that if she ran away this time, he would take her out of the family tree. Even that didn't upset her too much, even though harmony was incomplete. But still, the girl was glad to have a family. The first day she came into the world, her father called her crazy. She even thought he hated her. Still, she realized that either way it was better than if she was living her past life right now. Meanwhile, some guy was in the office and he was looking at the paperwork. Then he was approached by what appeared to be his assistant, who asked if he was reading those documents again. to which he replied that they were just in his desk drawer, and he decided to look at them. Afterward, the aide said that the studio, by the absence of news for 18 years, it had long since forgotten everything there. But the lad replied that his father was worried to the end, that he had not been able to repay that debt. The aide said they would write to him themselves if they needed to. So don't think too much about it. And yet they came to the conclusion that there was no point in worrying about something that hadn't even happened yet. They were hoping to be contacted soon. The lad tried to believe it after all, for the assistant had convinced him that he had a premonition that never deceived him. Meanwhile, Kaiser, the head of the household, saw Yvonne's work and couldn't believe how she'd handled it. It turns out that the girl had suggested a good idea, and his assistant suggested that in this way, it would be possible to estimate the monthly sales of the company at once, to which the man replied that he simply could not believe it, because the square table method of organization is a real reform that Yvonne came up with. Her father couldn't even think the girl was capable of that, to which the assistant replied that Yvonne had always been very intelligent, something many people didn't notice, and even her own father, who was always sure she wasn't as smart a girl as he'd like her to be, and it turns out he'd been doubting her all her life. He then asked for her personal assistant to be called into his office. When she arrived, the first thing she did was to greet the gentleman and ask how she could help him, to which he replied that he would like to ask one question, if she had noticed anything strange in Yvonne's behavior lately, for she was very often around her, and surely her had managed to notice something. To which she replied that she wanted to talk to him about it too, because she noticed that after he gave her daughter a punishment, she became very upset, which her father could not have expected, and was surprised, because she had not reacted before when he yelled at her or punished her. Afterward, the girl told me that Yvonne had started eating less, about half the usual amount, although she used to eat 6 meals a day since she was a child. Also, the girl had heard from the other assistants that Yvonne had cleaned up the desk in the office. The man was sure that there must be some reason for all this, for his daughter could not have changed so drastically in a few days, to which the assistant suggested that it was probably because of the prince. His rejection must have shocked Yvonne, to which the girl's father replied that he didn't even know that, and probably didn't need to punish her then, because it was hard enough as it was, and maybe she still couldn't get over the prince. And then there was her father's constant punishment, for which he was a little ashamed of her. But unlike him, the girl felt just fine, for the job he had devised for her was the easiest thing she had ever done. Yvonne never thought her skills in a computer program could come in handy here. Meanwhile, the assistant tried to tell the girl's father that Yvonne may not show her sadness or feeling bad, but she still seems upset about the prince. But in fact, the girl is not sad at all now. On the contrary, she is happy with every moment of her new life. But so far her father doesn't notice it and thinks she's very upset. The next day, he began to think about the fact that Prince Adrian didn't even look in his daughter's direction, because she was so much in love with him. Yvonne is a very kind, incredibly beautiful girl, who at the same time has magical abilities. In addition, is the eldest daughter of the Argentros family. It was unclear to him what the prince lacked. He had a suspicion that it was as if the prince was purposely being so demonstrative and going out with other girls. It was still unknown to the girl's father what the prince didn't like about his daughter. After a little while, the girl came into her father's office and thought he'd called her in to complain about her poorly done job. Before he started criticizing her yet, Yvonne made sure to explain that she had really tried, and if anything was wrong, she was ready to apologize. To which her father replied that that's not the point. Her work is really done amazingly, so she doesn't need to worry about it, which was a great pleasure to her, for she had seldom heard anything like that from her father. He then noticed that Yvonne looked very pleased today, and wondered if something good had happened, to which she replied that she just didn't think he would praise her today, as it had never happened before. And it is not surprising, because before, she behaved much worse, for which she apologized, which very much once again surprised her father. She had never apologized for anything before, and on top of that she said she regretted her behavior all those years ago. Afterwards, the girl saw that her father was very much surprised that she had apologized for something for the first time in her life. He just couldn't believe it, and he thought it wasn't his daughter, but some other girl. There came a point where he wanted to support his daughter after the prince situation. He said he bought a new house so she could break things there to let go of her feelings of anger. Yvonne didn't quite know what he was talking about, as she had never heard him say that before. To make it clearer to her, The aide explained that the Duke had set up a shield near the house, so she could do whatever she wanted there, and everything would remain intact. Afterwards, she said it was not necessary at all, for she had dreamed of her own house all her life, and it was not at all necessary to destroy it. When suddenly she notices the suspiciously satisfied look on her father's face. So she said she didn't want to destroy any house. She felt fine without it. After these words, for some reason, he started to get angry with the prince. He thought that because of him, his daughter had changed so much, and this was very unusual for him. Even though his daughter's behavior had changed for the better, he still felt bad that because of some prince, his daughter might be sad, even though she really wasn't. He tried not to show all that emotion, but he couldn't, except that he really had nothing to worry about, because his daughter was doing fine. Because of her assistant, he's now convinced that his daughter is sad about it, which he's very wrong about. But at the same time, the girl was also surprised that this man could be so kind. She had a different opinion of him before. The only thing you'd hear from him was her mistakes or stupid antics. Whatever she did, he'd find a reason to punish her. And that's when the girl realized that maybe he was softer in character than he looked. It was time he wanted to solve her problem, and told her that if she wanted something, she could tell him about it. And if it was a romantic relationship, there are plenty of decent men besides a prince. And she had something to say, and he was looking forward to her asking him for something. The girl said, since she had not had this opportunity before, she would like to study. With this word, she shocked her father once again. And learning and Ivan used to be two different concepts and never crossed paths. And of course, no one could refuse her. Everyone was delighted with her unusual wish. After reincarnation, she didn't know much about this life, and she would like to learn everything. Surprisingly, she was very happy that she could concentrate only on her studies and no one would distract her. She had an assumption that if her father was a mage, then she could control magic like he could. When suddenly something seemed very strange to her. For some reason, she can't master magic books in any way. Though there is no problem with reading, the girl suspects it's because she's not the real Ivan. After that, she started thinking that maybe she didn't need magic at the moment. But still, she was curious to try it, and she was hoping for some kind of miracle. To make things much more realistic, she remembered what real mages usually shouted out. It was to better believe it could work out, but at that moment, things didn't quite go the way she'd imagined, because someone walked in on her. When this man saw how strange Ivan was acting at that moment, he asked what was going on. It looked a little ridiculous, and her brother Barden, who already thought her crazy and insane, saw it all. Turns out he came for a reason. He needed to ask her something. It concerned the documents she was working with. He asked if she was the one who put the sales in order and made the spreadsheets, to which she replied that she was the one who had. He then inquired why she suddenly wanted to study something. Was it really for some title? This question did not please her very much, for she was not studying any subject for that purpose, but only because of personal interest. So it was a bit disheartening to hear such assumptions. Once again, she was tried to be blamed later, which is not true. So she explained that she was just trying to help the whole family, which surprised Barden a lot. Ivan began to tell him, monsters used to appear once every 10 years, but now that time frame was getting shorter and shorter, and he should realize it. It's clear that the next battle will be even bigger, and will probably be 3 years from now, to which he asked why she suddenly came to that conclusion. The girl replied that she had been studying history all day today, so she had reason to assume it. Plus, she was able to figure it out on her own and compile the data into a table. She then asked him if he realized she wasn't doing it for the title, but for a more important purpose. And yet he wondered why she had decided to help them. It wasn't like her to do so. To which she replied that the reason is very simple and obvious. She just wants to help, and after that we can enjoy a quiet life. When she explained the real reason, asked if her little brother understood, after saying that, he didn't even know how to react, and asked what she had just called him. Ivan repeated it, though she knew perfectly well that it was unusual for him to hear it from her. Then he concluded that she was as crazy as he thought she was. After this conversation, he, like his father, began to blame the prince, for because of him they thought Ivan had changed so much, and even came to see him to talk about it. He feels like it can't be left alone. To which the man replied that he was very glad that he wasn't the only one who noticed it, because it was really very serious indeed. They started telling each other that she called someone awesome and someone else a brother. It was really weird. As a result, they concluded that the prince's refusal was a big blow for Ivan, after which he even changed his character and attitude to people. Barden told his father that Ivan was eager to start living a quiet life, which is what she had told him a few minutes ago, and the father replied that even the teachers who came to see the girl today praised her, and said that Ivan was very capable and quick to memorize information. The girl's father and brother mistakenly thought that all these changes were due to the prince, but they didn't know that there was a different girl in the real Ivan's body altogether, and that's where her changes in character, ability, and attitude come in. They were eager to introduce her to a man that even a prince couldn't match. Her father was sure that after dating a good man, her condition would definitely improve, and she would forget that prince forever. Barden agreed with this, for it was better than sitting at home and being sad all the time. Ivan was still young enough in their opinion, but they decided to let her go out on a date. Afterwards, the girl's brother asked if there were already any candidates with whom Ivan would be happy and forget all the problems, because it would be nice to have the right person to make a girl feel better about herself. And apparently the girl's father knew such a man, so he sent him a letter. It turned out to be the same guy who was looking at documents in his office recently. He got a letter from Kaiser, the girl's father, so he has an excuse to go to the capital. He doesn't seem to mind the offer. 18 years ago, the previous Duke of Yales was a rather straightforward and opinionated man. He took part in the fight against the monsters, trusting only his experience. However, during the battle he was trapped in the flames. At the time, the Kaiser was passing by on his way north to get medicine for his wife. The great magician Kaiser helped the Duke in that dangerous situation, and thus the Yales family owed a great debt to Argentros. The proud father was on the one hand grateful for the rescue, but asked not to divulge the fact that the mage had helped him out of danger. In return, he promised to fulfill any request of the Kaiser. At present, thanks to one letter, a forgotten promise has come to light again. It turns out that in this letter, the girl's father didn't just write his request. He explained the reason why he needed it, so that the Duke would know exactly what was required of him. Duke's aide asked him several times if he was sure he wanted to help this family. He said that the Duke was under no obligation because of some help in the past to date that man's daughter. But the Duke ignored him and asked him to prepare a new suit for him and gifts for the girl. Even though his assistant tried to talk him out of it, it was important to him, as a real man, to help a girl who needed support. Moreover, he owed her father a debt, and besides, even without it, he would not have denied it to the wife. After that, the aide realized he couldn't beat his stubbornness, so he set off to do his bidding. After the aide left, the Duke was insanely curious to know something: how terrible a person the Duke's daughter is, for there are many rumors about her that she's a real villain. When she'd look at someone, those people would always want to leave afterwards. They'd be so scared after one look at her. It was unusual for her to feel that the sight of her made people so afraid of her. Her brother saw something good in it, and explained that it meant her reputation was still strong. After some time, they finally arrived at their destination. It was a very beautiful place, that I wanted to look at all the time, to savor this beauty and take my time. It's been a long time since the girl has been here, so she's forgotten how beautiful this place is. And since Yvonne has another girl in her body now, she has to pretend like she remembers something. It's the exact spot where the real villain threw an object that could threaten the people who were there. For some reason, her brother insisted that she repeat the act, to somehow see the mean sister he'd grown accustomed to. But for now, she wasn't really paying attention to his words and comments, because she was busy looking at the beauty around her. It was the Imperial Palace, which was far more beautiful than she had imagined it to be. But for some reason, at that moment, her brother, for some reason, asked her not to look there. And her father was of the same opinion. Yvonne didn't understand why they were doing it. Afterward, Barden asked her if she still regretted it or not, to which she asked why she had to regret anything. And that's when she realized that those two definitely thought she was still in love with the prince. So she decided to ask for their attention to explain that it wasn't true, but they ignored her and thought it wasn't true. Meanwhile, they had already arrived at the best atelier in the empire, whereupon they were greeted by the staff and told that they had not seen each other for a long time. All these people, strangely enough, were also surprised that the girl had changed very much, at least in character. She used to always come alone and all the workers never talked to her, because she was unpleasant to talk to, and for years, no one would even say hello to her. But when they saw years later, they were very pleased to notice the change in her behavior. They were really obvious. Even her look is very different from what it used to be. After they greeted each other, the girl's father ordered that a suitable outfit be found for his daughter. And that's when she realized that it looked like they dragged her out here on purpose to cheer her up. And at times like this, she realizes she has a family that cares about her. This best atelier in the empire provided so many incredibly beautiful dresses for her, which were very hard to try on in one day. And most of them fit her very well. There wasn't a single dress that wasn't pretty or didn't suit this girl. She was insanely grateful for this opportunity to choose the very best of what the very best designers had created. While she was choosing a dress for herself and measuring them, her father and brother were watching and talking about how well she looked, to which her father said she was the most beautiful lady in the empire. At some point, they were asked to choose beautiful and appropriate shoes for the dress. After they'd picked everything out and bought the prettiest things, that wasn't all they had prepared for the girl. So they went to another store that Yvonne had chosen, and there they found a very nice piece of clothing, and asked her to try it on, because we had to complete her look. After seeing her in her new clothes, they couldn't expect the girl to look so chic. For a few moments they just froze as if someone had frozen them. Father and brother couldn't even find the words to describe how beautiful she was. When they looked at her for too long, it made her embarrassed, to which they replied that it was okay. At one point, father told her that when Yvonne smiles, she reminds him of her mother, for she was just as beautiful. They talked some more after that. Yvonne continued to get lots of compliments, and it was time to head back in. To end the day well, Barden suggested we go out for tea, to which her father immediately replied, "We could go to a cafe nearby." And then Yvonne assumed that they were doing it on purpose, because they were talking too naturally. Plus, she wanted to get home quickly. She was feeling very tired after all that shopping. When they finally got to the coffee shop, they started asking her if she liked today's purchases, to which she replied that she was very grateful to them for it, and she really liked everything they bought her. But afterward, Yvonne remembered that she had nowhere to go in those beautiful dresses, so it would be okay to take half of them back. It turns out that they bought these clothes for her and came to the cafe for a reason, and to answer her question, they did tell her that she was about to meet a nice man, and it's 3 days from now, at the same cafe, so she can wear her prettiest dress to the meeting. She wasn't ready for that, because it turned out that this shopping trip wasn't just for fun. It was very hard for her to react normally to it because she didn't know what they were up to or what they wanted to accomplish. To make Yvonne feel a little calmer, her brother and father decided to tell her something about this man, that his name is Rodnan Yels. He is the young head of the Yels family, one of the respected clans of the empire, and that he has many accomplishments to his credit. And she seems to have heard something about him. They say he's a handsome, gentlemanly, and versatile man, admired by all. Afterwards, she asked why such an amazing man would want someone like her, a villainous Yvonne Argentrose with a terrible reputation. To which the father reacted very violently. He didn't understand who dared to give his daughter such a nickname. And even Barden backed him up, and began to change her mind, for she is a decent, intelligent, and beautiful girl. After saying that, she was once again very pleased. She felt that this was her real family. Even though she's not even the real Yvonne Argentrose, it was still unusual to hear something like that. Then she was informed that all her presents were already wrapped. Dad's gone to the tower. Barden's got some business to take care of. They're both very busy, but they still made time for her. When suddenly some assistant asked her if they were done talking and started yawning. Though when her father was here, he acted quite differently, more polite. Yvonne at that moment wanted to teach him a lesson and show him that she also needed to be treated with respect, even if no one else was around. So she asked what it was on his arm, and the guy was surprised and asked what was wrong, when suddenly, Yvonne made it look like there was a wasp there to scare the cocky guy, and then she slapped him hard on the arm, where it looked as if there was an insect, though in fact it was only an excuse to punish him for disrespecting her. The fellow noticed at once that the girl had very strong hands, and that her blow had unexpectedly hurt him. It was very good news, plus he'll know what happens when you do that to a girl. When suddenly something amazing and unusual began to happen, like some kind of magic. Yvonne saw some sort of dark purple shadow on the floor at the same second, moving around. Did it have anything to do with the fact that she had just punched a man? It's never happened before, so it was hard to figure out what caused it. It was definitely a magical phenomenon that appeared after her hit. Just what it meant was very interesting. When she realized that she had created it, it was both interesting and unpleasant at the same time, for it was not the most beautiful thing she could see, and because of the unknown, it was doubly scary. Yvonne didn't even know what she should do in this situation, run away from it, or try to figure it out. But that wasn't the worst of it. A while later, this shadow started talking, asking if she was a great magician, and also saying that this wasn't the end. Yvonne certainly thought she might have some powers, but she had no idea that it could make her so scared. If she did, which the girl doubted very much, as suddenly, the shadow disappeared abruptly, and then she starts asking the guy if he saw it, to which he says he doesn't know what she's talking about. The girl began to think that perhaps she might have imagined it, though she knew for sure that she had definitely seen and heard it. The next day, Yvonne decided to give a small gift to her assistant, who was very happy about it. So much so that she said the word thank you more than 30 times. Yvonne, after that amount of gratitude, definitely realized that the helper liked it all. The girl didn't expect anyone to be happy with a few strips of lace fabric. When the assistant saw that her mistress sat down at once to her books, she asked why she was reading something so often, to which Yvonne replied that she wanted to find something. She wanted information on shadow-related monsters, but so far she hadn't found anything of the sort. After that dark talking shadow appeared, she even thought someone wanted to destroy her, and it seems like the genre of this story has changed from romance to thriller, because she constantly feels a sense of anxiety and the unknown. As suddenly, she asked the assistant if she happened to remember telling her not to touch her in any way, only it was still unclear what it was about. But Yvonne realized that the assistant knew something, so she decided to ask her what it was about. Turns out it's the right-hand drawer of the desk in the artifact lab, which is a cabinet for making something dangerous. But the assistant said she really hadn't touched anything. The girl already knew that, but still wanted to know what this place was, since she had only recently reincarnated as Yvonne. We can conclude that Yvonne was really into destroying buildings, and afterwards asked her assistant, when someone wanted to go in there, to let her know about it. The assistant replied that if they discovered that someone had broken in, they would immediately throw an earring that would damage the room in a second, because the jewelry was unusual. It is designed for just such situations when it is necessary to harm the enemy or destroy a room. After saying that, Yvonne realized that this assistant was not as ordinary as she seemed. She had indeed helped her mistress in her plans very often. Evening has come, and the girl is up to something again. Only it remains unknown why she has asked her assistant to inform her when someone enters a certain room, as suddenly, that same evening, she knew of some secret entrance, and for some reason went to the laboratory of the... There was one place that made it possible to get in without anyone noticing. When she went in there, she was very surprised because she thought places like that were usually dark and boring, but it turned out to be the opposite. It was very beautiful all around, and there were so many colorful jars and gems on the shelves. There were also many books and papers on which something was written, and many other interesting things she wanted to find out about. The first thing she did was pick up one of them and began to look at it. What these jars were filled with glowed beautifully, as if there were sparkling particles inside there. After that, she went to the table her assistant had told her about. But the most important thing for her was to find that box of... And it didn't take long for that to happen. It was close by, so Yvonne immediately decided to see what was there. There was her hardcover diary and one book. It remained to be seen why it was so important that she had asked an assistant to guard the place. To make some sense of it all, she went to the diary. She wanted to read what was written there as soon as she could, because it might contain some very important information that could help her in some way. But unfortunately, it wasn't easy. The girl was even a little upset because her strength wasn't enough to open it up. Afterward, she saw some book that she had never seen before, so I immediately turned my attention to her, because she looked like she was unusual or special. And of course she couldn't help but open it and read it, because anything related to the theme of magic and books, she just can't ignore. And there was some really interesting information in there. Yvonne even wanted to take the book with her to read in her room, but unfortunately it can't be done, as suddenly she finds something about magical memory loss, and even remedies that will help restore all lost magical powers to anyone who has had them. After seeing this book and reading the information, something became obvious to her. It turns out the real Yvonne had magical memory loss. No other explanation for why this book is here yet. The girl thought she'd been failing for a long time to use magic because she's not the real Yvonne, but it turns out it's because she's sick. But fortunately, there is a healing process whereby she can get her powers back. You had to crush 1 kilogram of Thiel's crystal, and if you drink the tea regularly, you might be cured. But there was one problem. The value of this crystal for 1 gram, 10 million gold, and for 1 kilogram, 100 million gold, it was too much money. Meanwhile, the Duke was already climbing in for his first meeting with Yvonne, busy picking out suitable clothing. But with this, he was helped by assistants who were real professionals in their work, and did it without any problems. When they saw the result of their work, said that this garment fit him just perfectly, and they were honored to help him with it. Even his assistant, who was constantly dissatisfied with something, even he liked this image. He then began to ask if there was any interesting news for him, to which the aide replied that there was nothing so far. It was obvious how excited the Duke was about the upcoming meeting. He had even hired the very best clothing designers to please Yvonne. But he wasn't the only one who's also responsibly preparing for this meeting. A girl also spends all her free time preparing herself to look her best at the first meeting. When the assistant was helping to comb her hair, she remarked that perhaps the girl had not slept well at night, for her complexion was too pale. Afterwards, for some reason, Yvonne asked to see her list of possessions because she wants to buy something. But the assistant replied that there had been no change since mine's last sale, to which Yvonne asked if this was the last mine and she had nothing else left. It turns out that Yvonne had spent it all on loans from the magic company, and that was the last of her possessions. It became a real problem, because if it turned out that in some dangerous situation, she couldn't use magic, there could be a lot of trouble. So the girl said that the assistant might not choose jewelry for her for a long time, and instead better pick and prepare the magic ball. And even in this situation, the girl didn't miss the opportunity to compliment the mistress, and said that with any jewelry, she would look gorgeous, so you can really not bother with it. A few minutes later, she had the magic orb on her desk, which she was trying to learn something from. Like if there's any inexpensive teals on sale right now that she really needs. But it turns out that even a man who has a lot of money, even he will not be easy to buy it. Because this stone is too few in the empire. Because there are too many people who want to buy it. From then on, all she could think about was finding or making more money. Because that's really her #1 concern right now. Because it's about her health and her capacity. It's gotten to the point where she's already looking at items in her room, with the goal of possibly exchanging them for money. But it did not end there. As she has several dresses, she even thought of selling some of them. Thanks to this will get not a little money. The very date her father and brother had recently arranged for her, to help her in some way. But when her thoughts were only on where to make money, the Duke asked what she was thinking so earnestly about. And then she remembers that she's on that date, so she needs to pay attention to him and not think about her own problems at that moment. The girl already knew this guy was going to be very handsome, but she didn't think his beauty would exceed her expectations. He was much better than she had imagined. Because of that, she even wished she could have been the first to set him up on a second date. But now wasn't the time for that, because she thought it would be better for them if she got out of there as soon as possible. The girl was sure that he was not here of his own free will, so while there was an opportunity, she decided not to miss it. But before she did, she apologized for saying it in the first meeting. Yvonne asked if he could lend her some, though really it took a lot, money. The girl thought that after such words he would be shocked and quickly leave the place. But for some reason he did not leave, and continued to look at her. Because of his long silence, she became very anxious, for fear of how he would react, as suddenly he asked her one question: how much money she would need. She certainly thought he was a very generous man and wouldn't be able to refuse her, but she was still sure he wouldn't do it for some strange girl who demanded it the first time she met him. While she was telling the reason why she needed the money, he started looking for something in his jacket. Because of this, she was even more uncertain what she could expect from him. Though on the other hand, he had already asked how much she needed to. As he was a winner in many contests, every action of his made her nervous and afraid of. But it turns out he just wanted to get his pen out to start writing something down on a piece of paper. It was the perfect opportunity to start admiring his looks while he was busy doing something and not seeing it. Yvonne immediately noticed his long eyelashes and very beautiful silky and shiny hair. It made me want to ask what shampoo he uses. She even thought he was such a handsome man that he must have been the reason they invented the word beauty. When she started thinking about it too much, decided to stop it and not act like a girl in love. But unfortunately she couldn't do that. She also noticed something about him that seemed incredibly attractive. It was his hands. The girl wondered what he was writing there for so long with his beautiful hands. Even that action looked incredibly graceful. But when she saw the numbers that meant 20 million, she couldn't believe her eyes. She felt a little uncomfortable and embarrassed at the same time, because she just made him do it. So she tried to stop him and explain her request, and that he didn't have to help her at all, as he is a very well-mannered and polite person. Perhaps that is why he did not refuse her. It was important for her that this man did not regret that he had promised to help her. While the Duke was writing something on a piece of paper, Yvonne was trying her best to apologize for her behavior, and for allowing herself to ask something like that of the Duke. In order to somehow look less brazen, she tried to compliment him and act too modestly, not as she had originally done. But when she noticed that she was the only one talking the whole time, she felt even more awkward and uncomfortable. It was as if the girl wasn't letting him say a single word. It was unclear what was better to do in such a situation, whether to talk more or to keep silent. But it turns out it wasn't what she thought it would be after she finally said everything she wanted to say. He decided to tell her that he would give her the money for a reason, which she was very much surprised at, because he smiled suspiciously, which added to the excitement. But to somehow reassure her, he said that it was his personal money and his decision, so she could not worry about it as he had made the decision himself. Duke realizes that giving that amount of money to a strange girl on a first date is a big risk, but he's willing to do it anyway. Yvonne asked him if he didn't think she seemed a bit suspicious or letting herself go too much, to which he replied that she didn't seem to him as some kind of brash or suspicious person, so it was fine. It was only because he was very polite that the girl began to feel more comfortable, when suddenly, he told her a very strange phrase, that she wouldn't have to run away from him. But what it meant, she didn't understand. So she looked him straight in the eye for a few minutes, for he began to speak in some ambiguous phrases that were very hard to understand and figure out what he meant. And whatever her behavior looks like right now, she really needs to run her errands. And after what he said, it'll be doubly suspicious. But it really is time for her to go. It's really hard to imagine what this girl looks like in the Duke's eyes. But either way, she's trying to look like someone who can be trusted with that much money. Since he's a real gentleman, he couldn't let a girl just go somewhere and still be sitting in the same place. So he offered to escort her to Argentros Manor, to which she replied that for some reason it was not necessary to do so. Afterwards, the Duke said he wanted to get to know her better, for she had told him nothing about herself during the date, and of course she was very glad of these words, for it was mutual. She was also madly anxious to get to know him better. But unfortunately, she was in a great hurry to go somewhere. So I have to apologize for that, and I promise to spend a lot more time with him next time. Turns out the reason she left was because she thought the Duke wasn't interested in being with her. So she decided to leave first. As suddenly, the Duke asked her for one request. Yvonne noticed that whatever he said, it was always somehow exciting and intriguing. In fact, he was going to ask, if she didn't mind, to call each other by their first names the next time they met. And he asked if she was okay with such a, as he would be insanely pleased to hear her address him by his name, and it was mutual. So the girl accepted the offer. Apparently he was so determined to leave a good impression that he acted like he was in love with her, and was looking forward to their next meeting, although maybe it was true, and it wouldn't even be surprising if he really fell in love with her the first time he met her, because she was incredibly beautiful that night. But in order for the girl to call him by name, he needed to introduce himself, which they forgot to do at the beginning of the date. He said his name was Rodnane. It was the only information besides that he was very handsome that she knew, but still, they'll have time to get to know each other and see if they can be together or not. That said, neither of them has to pretend that everything is fine if it isn't. The girl's father only wanted to introduce her to the Duke, and he'll be really happy if they genuinely love each other. After the girl had gone, she went to the fountain, where there was a quiet place, in order to calm herself a little, for she was sure she was unworthy of this man. It was very foolish of her to think so, for if he didn't like her, he would have left at once, and he wouldn't have promised to give a lot of money to a girl he didn't like. She doubted herself and her looks too much, for they had only met him through his father's. Suddenly some guy comes up to her. Yvonne hasn't had time to calm down after one guy, but another guy shows up right away. He had very beautiful golden hair that immediately catches the eye. He was also a very handsome guy, and the most attractive and incredible thing about him was his blue eyes that you wanted to stare into for as long as possible. He immediately said that lady was too persistent, because even on the day of her date, she was looking for him in the palace, It was a joke, but even because of it, the girl was very embarrassed. This guy is the favorite son of the emperor's concubine. His real mother died, so he was adopted by the current empress. Thus he became the heir, and always only cared about his reputation. Therefore disliked Yvonne. If any of his clothes or accessories were of a color that reminded him of Yvonne, he avoided it in his appearance, and refused her love on several occasions. Could this be the same prince that made the girl so sad, her brother and father thought? He talked to her strangely enough, and sometimes he wouldn't even let her say a word. Even though his looks are handsome enough, against that posh duke, he becomes less attractive to her. Now, she realizes how foolish it was to fall in love with such a man, for there are worthy men with whom she would not feel ill at ease, such as the Duke of Rodnan. Unlike the handsome man she was on a date with, this narcissistic guy seems less deserving of her attention. When she decided to go off on her own, it was unusual for him to have someone walk away from him, and by that act, the girl first made him angry, because she showed him she wasn't interested in talking to him at all. I should have done this a long time ago, so this guy wouldn't be so sure of himself. He didn't like it so much that he grabbed her arm, because he didn't want everyone around him to see someone leaving him. This time, Yvonne would not tolerate such behavior, and decided to remember that she only deserved to be treated with respect, and she was not going to tolerate anything like this. This guy saw that the girl wouldn't let him grab her by the arm, be rude to her, or try to hold her back, just so she wouldn't leave for the sake of her own reputation. So he immediately apologized for what he did, just so she wouldn't start ranting about it when other people were around. It was the perfect moment to humiliate him, as he usually did, towards her. The girl told him that she had long since forgotten him, and she wasn't interested with him. She decided to let him know once and for all that she wasn't the best man she'd ever met, to which he tried not to show that he was possibly offended. Afterwards, to restore his reputation, he tried to say something, but it looked very foolish. Yvonne began to feel very nervous, for she wanted to get away from this man as quickly as possible. That guy even started saying some stupid stuff like the girl wants attention and she's got a date with the Duke to do it. When all of a sudden, this man comes up to them that the girl must have been very happy about. And it was the Duke of Rodnan. He was very timely. Maybe he just sensed that Yvonne needed help at that moment. That's why he came. He knew right away that this guy was probably the one who made the girl's father ask her for support so she wouldn't be sad. It was a very unexpected encounter. But the guy with blonde hair was the most excited at this moment. When people around saw Yvonne standing next to guys like that, everyone immediately started to envy her because they didn't understand how she could have earned their attention. They immediately began to assume that one of them was her lover or something like that. And someone on the contrary thought that these three got together to argue about something and find out some misunderstandings, because there can't be anything good between them. Yvonne was feeling very uncomfortable at this point, for what she disliked most was having a lot of people looking at her. But as always, Rodnan rectified the situation and said he had a gift for her that he didn't have time to give her on the date. He then said that this wasn't the right place, so they could leave and she could look at her gift in a quiet environment. The girl thought he realized she was in a bad situation, so he decided to help her. It was just what she needed. But first she has to say goodbye to the other guy and let him know she's not interested in him anymore. So they decide to leave and spend the evening together without him. She reasoned that their date wasn't over yet, so it was time for them to leave so they didn't waste any time. To which the Duke reacted with understanding and decided to say something as well. At that moment, the girl felt the real male support she had been missing before. After meeting the Duke, the girl finally realizes that you never have to earn someone's love, and there will always come a moment when someone can love someone for who they are. The guy they'd walked away from felt secondary for the first time in a long time, or the one who'd been replaced by someone better, as he usually did. There came a moment when he found himself in the shoes of a girl he'd done the same thing to before. And it all happened when a lot of people around here saw it. Which means that absolutely everyone is about to find out how Yvonne finally got her revenge on him. Because now she's not interested in him. Because she's found a man who's truly willing to support her and make her happy around him. Yvonne thanked the Duke several times on the way, for it was a very good deed on his part to do that. And afterward, told him that she knew he had come here at her father's request, and had no idea how hard it had been for him to get here. After saying that, he hesitated for some reason, and it looked like he was uncomfortable hearing it, for which the girl apologized, and said that, in any case, She was very glad to make their acquaintance, as suddenly he said her name, and after that he was just silent for a while. She was very curious as to what he wanted to tell her. At this point, this situation seemed romantic enough. They were just looking into each other's eyes as if they were communicating with amorous gazes. Even though it was too exciting, both the girl and the Duke were well aware that they probably liked each other, so neither one minded being so close to each other. Although none of them explicitly say so, in order not to rush things and gradually come to something more. When they stood there, they did not care whether anyone saw them or not, because everything was so pleasant and comfortable that they did not notice anyone. At some point he started acting differently than usual. It was more like a sign that he liked her. Yvonne's greatest fear was to act strangely, or to disappoint him, and because of that she was getting nervous and anxious. His behavior was as if it were not the first time they had seen each other, but it was the first time. So the girl was afraid that he might be doing it on purpose, and thus was just fulfilling her father's request, which she really doesn't want to do, because he's really her ideal of a man she'd like to date, because no one has ever wooed her the way he does. The main thing for her was to find out how sincere he was with her, and how interested he was in talking to her, aside from the fact that he was doing it at someone else's request, because the Duke didn't say anything to her about knowing, and there were two reasons for that. Either he didn't want to upset her, or he liked her, and for what reason he did, it didn't matter. Since now, despite that, he genuinely wanted to be with her, but he still needed to be convinced of that, so she knew it was too early to draw any conclusions yet. Yvonne would very much like to learn to read minds so that she could immediately know if someone is deceiving her or not, or, for example, in this situation, to understand the purpose for which he is communicating with her. The next day, the Duke was drinking his favorite hot drink with marshmallows as usual, and discussing with his assistant everything that had happened the previous day. So they were only discussing Yvonne. The Duke was sharing his impressions of the girl. The first thing he said about her was not something bad or strange, but on the contrary, he remembered how beautiful her eyes were. At this moment, when he was talking about her, he himself did not notice how he stopped listening to his assistant. It was as if he were talking to himself. Apparently it's for the reason that he really liked her, so he's only thinking about her, and even at that moment, he can't hear anyone else. When suddenly, for some reason, he recalled that his assistant had said he was good-looking, and afterward asked if that was really the case. Perhaps he thought the girl didn't like him enough. He kept thinking about the fact that she was looking at him somehow without emotion, which made him think that she didn't care about him and didn't like him at all. But the aide, as before, started blaming Yvonne for everything, and said she just had a vision problem, after which he realized he had said something unnecessary, and apologized. As suddenly the Duke heard some strange ringing, though such a thing had never happened before, and he wondered what it was. For some reason, Rodnane immediately began to picture an image of Yvonne, but he didn't understand why he was seeing it. It seemed to him as if the lady were calling him by name, or was just trying to remind him of himself by magic at a distance. But this was only his speculation. The aide then asked if the Duke had given the gift he had prepared for her. It turned out that he had completely forgotten to give it to her, and perhaps because of that, he began to feel some strange, disturbing noises. After the lady had left, he realized that he had told her about the gift a while ago. She must have been expecting it. But as a result, Rodnane had simply forgotten to give it to her. He felt bad for her, for he had not kept his promise, and he thought that the girl might be sad now, for she had not received her present. And maybe she just doesn't want to bring it up so she doesn't look too cocky. And all this was added to the thought that perhaps she did not like the Duke at all, for she looked sad, and would not let him know that he was wrong. Duke began to remember how he had helped her, and also at this moment he felt that he was indeed a true savior for her. But after that, he started having very stupid thoughts. Just because the girl was standing next to a guy who had blonde hair, he assumed she liked that kind of hair. After the Duke had already told his assistant everything, it was time to decide what time he was going home tomorrow, to which he replied that he wished to remain in the capital for the time being. He didn't expect that. He didn't understand what was keeping him here. He had only one option, which he didn't want to believe. How suddenly, the Duke needed to know if Lady Yvonne had any major debts. Was he going to help her with that? To which the aide was very surprised. But Rodnane answered him that it was not necessary to try to change his mind so much and so often, for it was his own business whether to help the girl or not. It was a wonder to the Duke why she needed to borrow so much money. After all, her family was considered one of the richest in the empire. He decided that he needed to find out by any means necessary the reason why she needed 200 million. He wasn't interested because he didn't want to help her. He was just curious. Besides, once again, as he relaxed in his office, he didn't notice how he started thinking only of her again. When he was thinking about something, thought it would be nice to prepare some kind of gift for her. Very little time had elapsed after this idea, and the gift for the girl for the morning was already in her room. It was the same teals. It was definitely at least 10 grams. Yvonne imagined that if converted into money, it would be 200 million gold pieces. It was the best and most beautiful gift she'd ever received in her entire life. In that moment, Yvonne realized exactly what Rodnan looked like to the perfect man. It would seem impossible to ruin such a beautiful moment, but her brother and father succeeded. They ran into her room too quickly and started asking about whether she had seen the prince. They didn't seem to like this, to which the girl replied that she had indeed seen him, but most of all, she was only interested in why they looked so strange. Like they've been working too hard because they've got a kind of abnormal complexion. It's like it's closer to gray or blue. At this point they began to feel guilty, as if because of them, the girl had met the one she had been sad about for so long and could not enjoy life. The father said he felt guilty about it, so he would be very happy if the girl could forgive him, since he didn't do it on purpose and didn't mean to hurt her. To which she told him that she was fine, and she was thrilled to have met the Duke, but worried that he might not like her. They conspired and began to reassure her that she was the most beautiful girl they had ever seen and known. No matter how playful it seemed, they still tried to improve her mood. But afterward, her father said the nicest words she had ever heard, that he was proud of such a smart and beautiful daughter. So he asked her not to even think about the fact that someone might not like her. It was nice for her, because after such words, she stops herself more confident and forgets that some unpleasant words can be said to her. And fortunately, lately she hears only compliments. As suddenly, Yvonne had something to tell him. It turns out she had decided to forget everything that had happened before, so she decided to start her own business. But her father and her brother didn't quite know what she meant. Only there was one very important point. She needed money for it. Of course, she told them about it right away, and asked for a little help, to which they reacted much better than she had imagined. Even her father praised it, and said that sometimes, such insolent behavior can lead to a good result. After that, she told them a specific amount, and even offered to give it to them with interest, so that they would definitely accept it. To which her brother replied that it was the price of just a few outfits, so he would give her the money for nothing. But she refused for some reason. Yvonne said she is writing a formal promissory note and will take a debt from her father that she is sure to repay, as it is important for her to gain his trust. Somewhat surprisingly, her father didn't start insisting that he would give her the money just like that, without any formal arrangement, and still agreed to her proposal. He explained that this way she could learn how to run a business faster, to which she thanked them, and said she would try not to disappoint them. After his daughter didn't just ask for money for her own affairs, she offered a formal contract stating that she would pay back the money. He was pleased to realize that she had changed for the better. Now he understands exactly how important it is for her to gain his trust, and for that she's willing to give up a huge amount of money with interest. Afterward, the girl's brother asked what Yvonne had said about her last date with the Duke, but her father was unaware of this. He hoped to arrange for them to meet again, depending on her reaction. The most important thing for him was for the girl to truly forget that prince, and not try to convince them that she really didn't love him anymore, just so they wouldn't worry about her. The prince is heir to the throne, but he doesn't have a strong power yet. He became heir because he was adopted by the empress, and that can change at any moment. To which the boy asked if his father meant that he wanted to influence the choice of an heir. The father replied that if the prince ceased to be the crown prince, he would no longer be able to look down on their family. The boy wondered if he would do that for his daughter. After all, their family had never interfered in the affairs of the imperial family. It turns out it's not just for his daughter's sake. The king's illegitimate daughter, Mare, who was brought in by the prince, doesn't inspire him with confidence. The guy agreed with that, and said that he was exactly the same opinion. Her healing skill that she used to save the prince was beyond the normal level, so he was also thinking of investigating it. As a result of the conversation, the father entrusted the matter to his son, since he is also interested in this. And also, he asked him to contact the third prince. Only what this is for is not yet known. Meanwhile, the girl was in her office and her assistant came to see her. She had some 2 letters, but no one knew who might have sent them. So it was very interesting to find out. Yvonne might have guessed that perhaps it was the Duke, but then it was unclear who the second letter was from. But it turned out that the assistant knew from whom the letters were from and told her mistress at once. It appeared that one of them was from the Duke of Yales, and the other from the Crown Prince of the... This news was half good and half bad. A letter from the Duke she would have loved to read and respond to. Only a letter from the Crown Prince. She didn't even want to open it. She longed to turn back the clock, to avoid that recent meeting with the prince, to avoid receiving that letter from him. But without even opening and reading the letter from the Duke, she somehow began to think it was possible he had written to her about how he didn't enjoy the date, and they would never see each other again, even though it even sounded too silly. But she believed it. But at the same time, she didn't want it to be so. And about the second letter, she suspected that perhaps the prince had prepared something bad for her, because of the fact that last time she had offended him very much and humiliated him in front of everyone around her. When the assistant noticed this, she realized for sure that Yvonne had made up these options for herself, and because of this, she was now afraid and unable to read the letters in peace. The assistant kept trying to calm the girl down, because her excitement would make people wait too long for an answer from her. And after a while, she decided to read them all, and asked me to give them to her before she changed her mind. And yet she was still a little anxious to read them. Yvonne even thought about the fact that the Duke might ask for his gift back. Or worse, say they would never meet again. The thing she'd hate most of all was that Duke would write something bad. After that, she'd definitely be disappointed in guys forever, and wouldn't be able to socialize with anyone for a few years if that happened. Though she had already opened the letter and was ready to read it, she looked as if through the sheet and saw no words. And when the time came that she finally made up her mind, she started reading. It said that he really enjoyed last night's date and was also concerned if she liked his gift. And if she has any time, he'd like to ask her for something, and he'd be very grateful if she'd agree to it. He asked if she would like to go with him to the opera tomorrow and spend the day together. After that, it said he would look forward to hearing from her. There was no way Yvonne could have expected this letter to be an invitation for a second date. It meant he definitely liked her. Otherwise, he would have just gone home. She was even told about it by her assistant, and she was very happy about it, which only means that the Duke doesn't mind and will be very happy to have a new date. But that wasn't the most surprising thing. It turns out the girl wanted to send a rejection, and the assistant couldn't understand what the reason was at all. The girl explained that he must have sent the letter as a courtesy, for he had come to visit at his father's request.